Karen, confident that tourists are the ones in charge here, pushed the royal guard and demanded a photo. But her arrogance turned into humiliation that shocked everyone who witnessed it. London, Buckingham Palace. A bustling day full of tourist excitement. A steady stream of people armed with cameras and selfie sticks flowed past the golden gates, gleaming under the sun's rays. Everyone seemed preoccupied. Some filmed videos, others posed with strained smiles, while a few were busy figuring out where they could find a decent cup of coffee. Among the buzzing crowd, Karen stood out. Karen was the kind of tourist who always had to be in the spotlight. Her large frame, clad in a loud pink t-shirt with glittering letters spelling Queen of Everything, was impossible to miss. Around her neck hung a camera, which she wielded like a royal scepter. Her face bore the confident expression of someone who was used to being in charge. She barked orders at her husband, a thin, meek man whose defeated demeanor suggested he'd rather be anywhere else but here. "George, take a picture of me here. No, wait, over there, where the gates are more visible," she yelled, oblivious to those around her. "And after that, we're going over to those funny little soldiers." The funny little soldiers Karen was referring to were the Queen's guards. One of them stood near the gates, as still as a statue. His towering bearskin hat and imposing uniform made him look regal and authoritative. His face was calm, and his gaze seemed to pierce into infinity. He embodied tradition and discipline, qualities Karen appeared utterly blind to. The crowd around the guard shifted on their feet, snapping photos from every angle. Some admired his stoicism. Others tried to provoke him into any kind of reaction. But no one dared cross the white line that separated the guard from the tourists. No one, except Karen. "George, get the camera ready," she announced loudly as she marched straight toward the guard. George helplessly shrugged, but made no attempt to stop her. Perhaps he knew it was futile. Karen approached the white line, stopping just short of crossing it, and stared at the guard as if willing him to notice her. Of course, he didn't react in the slightest. "Hey, soldier boy!" she shouted, taking a step forward. "Smile for the camera!" The crowd froze. A few people had already pulled out their phones, sensing the brewing spectacle. Everyone knew this wasn't going to end well. Everyone except Karen. The guard didn't move. His face remained as impassive as ever, giving no indication that he had even heard her. "What, you can't hear me?" Karen continued, raising her voice. "I said smile!" She took another step, now fully crossing the white line. Her bright pink t-shirt looked garish against the dignified stillness of the guard. The crowd began murmuring in disapproval. "Who does that? This is the Queen's Guard, not a circus act," muttered an elderly woman, holding a camera. But Karen paid no attention. To her, the guard was just part of the scenery. Her scenery. She wanted the perfect photo, and she was determined to get it, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. The crowd instinctively stopped moving. All eyes were on Karen as she crossed the white line, treating it like an ordinary crosswalk. Everyone present knew she was breaking the rules, but Karen was clearly not the kind of person who cared about such details. In fact, her face radiated a mix of irritation and smug pride in her boldness. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is she serious? You're not supposed to cross the line." Another person added disapprovingly, "This isn't Disneyland. These are the Queen's Guards." But Karen only heard herself. "Stop standing there like a statue," she barked, her tone resembling that of a fitness instructor giving commands. "You're here to entertain us tourists." She turned to her husband George, who stood off to the side, looking as though he wished he could disappear. "George, get the camera out. I'm about to take the picture of the century," she ordered, gesturing dramatically like a conductor leading an orchestra. The guard remained completely still, as though she didn't exist. His gaze stayed fixed in the distance, his expression unchanging, and that only made Karen angrier. "Are you ignoring me?" she shouted, hands on her hips. Her voice was so loud that a few pigeons scattered from the roof of the gates. "I'm not giving up, do you hear me?" It was now clear. Karen had no intention of backing down. Her lack of respect reached its peak when she stepped even closer, and in an appalling display of audacity, pushed the guard on the shoulder. The crowd gasped. Cries of shock and disapproval erupted simultaneously. "Oh my God, she pushed him! That's too far! She could be arrested for that!" Karen, of course, either didn't hear the remarks or chose to ignore them. Her face now displayed a mix of irritation and satisfaction. She thought she'd finally gotten through to the guard. "Well, now that I've got your attention," she said with a smug smile, "stop pretending to be a statue and take a picture with me, or I'll file a complaint." For a moment, the guard remained still, as if considering whether to let the incident slide. But Karen's push wasn't just a provocation. It was a physical breach that demanded a response. He stepped forward. The movement was fluid but firm, and it carried an air of quiet authority. The very atmosphere around him seemed to shift, heavy with the weight of his discipline and presence. For the first time, his gaze moved. No longer staring into the distance, he looked directly at Karen. The moment was charged, almost cinematic, as onlookers clutched their phones, capturing every second. "Madam," he said, his voice low and steady, yet commanding. "Step back." Karen froze for a split second, as if her brain was struggling to process the clear, confident words. "Madam, step back." It was like a cold shower that should have jolted her back to reality. But this was Karen. A cold shower only fired up the dragon within her. Straightening abruptly, as though preparing for a decisive counterattack, she bellowed loud enough to be heard down the street. "Are you telling me what to do?" Her face flushed a deep crimson, hands planted firmly on her hips, and she stepped even closer, almost toe-to-toe with the guard. "You work for us, the tourists," she continued, the tension in the air rising with every word. "We come here, spend money to see you, and you owe it to me to do what I ask." The crowd began to murmur. Someone whispered, "This is too much. She's completely lost touch with reality." Another added sarcastically, "What's next? She expects the queen herself to pose for her selfie?" But Karen was oblivious to the crowd and their judgment. To her, they were nothing more than a backdrop, and the guard, a mere prop. She had decided it was time to make this actor perform. "If you won't do it yourself, I'll help you," she declared with brazen audacity, reaching out as if to grab his arm and physically turn him for a photo. And that's when fate intervened, or more precisely, the wet stone beneath her feet. Karen failed to notice a small slippery patch left behind by the morning rain. As she stepped forward, her bright pink sneaker lost its grip on the surface. The crowd held its breath. Karen flailed her arms wildly, resembling a clumsy ballerina trying to regain balance. But gravity wasn't on her side. With a piercing shriek that sounded more like a seagull's cry, she landed flat on her back with a resounding thud. For a moment there was silence. Even the noisiest tourists and street performers paused. Then the crowd erupted into laughter. "Well, there's the show she was asking for," someone shouted, wiping tears of laughter from their eyes. "Queen of everything, huh? The ground clearly disagrees," another added. Karen lay sprawled on the stone tiles, her face beet red with a mix of anger and humiliation. She tried to get up but failed. Whipping her head toward George, who had kept a safe distance, she screamed, "George, help me up!" But George, for once, came alive. His usually passive face lit up with a rare smile. Instead of rushing to help his wife, he pulled out his phone and began recording. "George, are you crazy?" Karen shrieked, trying to shield her face with her hand. "Karen, darling, this video is going viral," he replied, barely containing his laughter. Meanwhile, the guard, maintaining his dignity and complete composure, calmly returned to his position. Adjusting his uniform slightly, he resumed his usual pose, as if nothing had happened. His stoic demeanor radiated a quiet strength and professionalism that starkly contrasted with Karen's spectacle. The crowd began to clap. Some waved at the guard in admiration, while others shouted praises. "Bravo, sir! True discipline!" "What composure!" Karen, now trembling with both embarrassment and rage, finally managed to stand. Her face was crimson, and her eyes darted between the crowd, her husband, and the guard. She seemed to be searching for someone to blame for her downfall. "This is all your fault!" she shouted, pointing at the wet stone tiles. "Why didn't anyone warn me about the slippery surface?" But her words were drowned out by the crowd's laughter. One tourist shouted back, "What, you wanted the guard to announce it? Careful, Madam Karen, the ground is wet." The laughter grew even louder. Karen, seething, turned on her heel and stormed off the square. The crowd continued to chuckle, and some were already uploading videos to their social media accounts. By the next day, the internet was ablaze with clips of Karen's humiliation. As for the guard, he remained standing, embodying resilience, honor, and tradition. As the crowd, tired from laughing, began to disperse, he adjusted his bearskin hat slightly. A gentle breeze brushed against his face, but his posture stayed as perfect as ever. He was part of something greater than the chaos around him.